Little accordion to start. Bigger accordion, going with the music, even bigger. Biggest one yet. Good. A big billowing, fluffy cloud coming up through the center. One more, just like that. Let that cloud expand. And watch that cloud move out into the space of the sky. Other side. Gathering it into your heart and releasing your heart's energy out to the universe. Ah, beautiful.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Disaster Shards Arts and Recovery Reporter's Notebook. I would first like to introduce you to our community. Then I'm going to welcome our esteemed guest today. And then we're going to go into a meaningful dialogue about our first in a series of exploring the role of the arts, its intersection with science, and its role in healing trauma and trauma integration in communities. Disaster Shock is a global response team. It's an international humanitarian relief organization dedicated to providing psychological first aid resources to children and families affected by disaster-related stress. We are an interdisciplinary team. Our materials have been translated to over 20 languages. The Disaster Shock Global Response Team is a special interest group of the Oxford Symposium in School-Based Family Counseling Program, which is sponsored by the Institute for School-Based Family Counseling. I would first like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Reggie Matthew. I'm an expressive arts advocate and educator. I am a member of the Arts and Recovery team. This project is called the Reporter's Notebook. It is a video interview series exploring voices of innovative expressive arts advocates speaking to the power of the arts in healing and integrating the mind, body, spirit in trauma recovery and the restorative impact of community-based arts practices. I'm honored to introduce today the founding teacher and program director of Dance for PD, an arts initiative of the Mark Morris Dance Group. Dance for PD is currently alive in 300 communities across the US, 25 countries. This is an arts initiative with 40 peer-reviewed studies exploring the role of dance for Parkinson's and movement disorders. So I would first like to define dance in PD, David, in the language of the expressive arts, and then I'm going to ask you to define dance for PD for us, to our audience, if that's okay. The expressive arts is the practice of cultivating personal inner artistry as a resource through dance, music, writing, drama, and art, a tool of intermodal experiential processing for problem solving, self-expansion, and personal growth. What we want to educate the audience about is that inner artistry is not only for performance, it's not only for the stage. Inner artistry is a sensibility we can bring to daily life. Through what's called intermodal processing, each person can develop the capacity to move between imagery, story, movement, and music. It is a whole brain approach, offering us to engage with all parts of ourselves. A multi-sensory tool which can support our inner journey as we metabolize the complexity of our lives, reimagine new possibilities, and open pathways of hope. David, Parkinson's is a neurological movement disorder. Can you explain to us and to our audience how the art form of dance facilitates mind, body, and spirit integration?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for including me in this series. I'm honored to be here speaking with you. The idea behind Dance for PD is really quite simple. And the idea is that all of the challenges that people living with Parkinson's face in their daily lives, whether they're physical challenges related to walking or balance or rigidity, whether they're emotional challenges related to mood, depression, or anxiety, or whether there are social challenges related to isolation or changes in social networks. Each of those aspects of living with Parkinson's has a corollary in dance and in the world of dance. So the idea behind Dance for PD is really that people with Parkinson's are invited into a dance studio to share a dance experience with professional dancers and dance teachers. And in that process, gain a sense of confidence, a sense of skill building, and a sense of emotional support as they contend with the challenges of Parkinson's. I say it very simply. Everything that dancers do in their training, in their daily practice, and in their performance is supportive, beneficial, and useful for people living with Parkinson's. So in that dance studio, it's an exchange of ideas. It's a sharing of skills and strategies and sense of perception between dancers with Parkinson's and dancers without Parkinson's. And that kind of exchange is the basis for the program that we share with the global Parkinson's community.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing you say is that art has something important to offer to science, and spaces that can integrate these realms are critical for the well-being and the resiliency of people with a condition such as Parkinson's.
What's important about the Dance for PD experience is that it is an artistic experience. Yes, there may be therapeutic benefits. There are, as you said, more than 40 peer-reviewed studies on the impact of dance on people with Parkinson's, with quantitative and qualitative measures in there, and providing evidence for what we do. But at the heart of what we do is an artistic experience. People with Parkinson's coming into that class think of themselves as artists and as dancers and not as patients. And we think of ourselves as dancers and teaching artists, not as therapists. We're not there to solve a problem. We're not there to address the symptoms of Parkinson's. We don't need to, because in that artistic experience, everything that people with Parkinson's have to contend with is addressed through the art form.
Mm-hmm. Like the disaster shock community, Dance for PD is also a program that has had a global reach. I've heard you say in your lectures that dance has the same DNA. My next question to you is, what are the core principles of Dance for PD that cuts across cultures? And at the same time, how has Dance for PD been translated, adapted, or innovated across cultures?
A great question. So I think the 4 pillars of what we do are the perfectly balanced synthesis of the physical, the cognitive, the expressive and emotional, and the social. Those are the elements of dance that are present in every dance experience, right? Dance is always a physical activity. The body's involved. We're working on very complex and basic motor skills in the dance class. But in order to make those movements happen, we have to use our brains. We have to integrate music, coordination, choreography, sequencing, mirroring, all of those cognitive activities that allow dance to happen. We're also expressing ourselves. The first thing that I think sets dance apart from exercise is the fact that it is expressive. It is allowing us to speak our own truth through our bodies, to express emotions and stories through our bodies. And finally, dance primarily is a social activity. It started as a social activity. It started as a way of us as a species communicating and sharing stories together in a sense of ritual. And it has continued to the modern era with that same sense of being part of a group, connecting, sharing, and communicating. So those 4 pillars are present wherever you're dancing in the world. And then I'm going to not get into the nitty-gritty of the DNA, because the DNA is really, for me, about sort of the motor fundamentals, things like walking, turning,
Mhm.
shifting weight,
Mhm.
right? Coordinating the upper body doing one thing, the lower body. Those are things that we see shared among many dance forms. I don't want to be too general, but many dance forms around the world. So whether you're doing flamenco or West African dance or hula or
Mhm.
ballet, those motor elements, that motor DNA is present, and it's all that's the DNA that's helpful for Parkinson's.
Mhm.
So on top of that, yes, you're adding style, you're adding cultural specificity, you're adding music, and all of those are incredibly layered and uh, important. But
Mhm.
at the basic level, the motor DNA is the same.
Mhm.
And so that's why the program, I think, works, because what we're teaching in our training program is a methodology and an approach for adapting movement to make it accessible and safe and enjoyable for people with Parkinson's.
Mhm.
But that can happen in any movement form and any movement style.
Mhm.
With the
Um,
innovation that I think is a really clear example of how something can be translated and adapted is, uh, our classes in New York are very specifically targeted to people living in New York City. We're bringing in, concert dance, modern ballet. We do a lot of musical theater. We do references to Broadway shows because people go and see those shows and they want to dance in that style here. So when we had teacher trainees come from India, they saw that and they said, we're not going to do the same thing, but what that looks like for our group is to do a warm-up borrowing from Bharatanatyam and Kathak dance, which is a classical Indian forms, very technical, very specific,
Mhm.
much like ballet is. And then we're going to, for our big movement across the floor, we're going to borrow from the Bollywood tradition, and that to us is sort of what Broadway is to you. And so that was, I think, for me, a very clear transposition of the work and how it can be adapted and how it can thrive in various cultural contexts.
Mhm. And currently Dance for PD is in Europe, in Asia, in India, I believe, and also in Australia.
Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan, South Korea. Yeah. So also South Africa, Zimbabwe. So yes, it's all over. And again, the thing that's worked about it, and I think that the thing that allows us to wake up feeling comfortable in the morning is that we are not imposing uh, a specific culture or a particular style on
Mhm.
other groups.
Mhm.
We're suggesting an approach, we're suggesting a methodology, but the content, the the meat of that class is up to the individual teacher.
Mhm.
And that, I think, allows for, again, a very personal and culturally specific and locally specific expressive environment for those participants. They're not trying to replicate what happens in New York. They are creating their own spontaneous and organic experience in that class.
So I believe that last year was the 20th anniversary of Dance for PD. Is that correct? Or is it this year?
We're still in it. Yes, it's
Oh,
from October 21 to October 22. We started in October 2001.
mhm. Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
I also know that this is a program that's evolved from the lived experience of the students, that you've really taken an inside out approach, that it's been very person centered. Can you talk a little bit about how Dance for PD has evolved over the 20 years?
Dance for PD has evolved from a participant-centered model.
Mhm.
There's a saying in the Parkinson's community and in the disability community more broadly, nothing about us without us.
Mhm.
So that forms a core principle for us from the very first class, which I taught. I stopped the class at the end and I said, let's talk. Tell me, what was that like for you? What worked for you? What didn't feel good? What would you like to do again? And that dialogue formed the basis of our curriculum. So we didn't come in saying, this is what we think should happen, or this is what this is what the scientific research says we have to do in the class. We definitely lean on the research to support what we're doing. Our class is evidence backed, but it's based on a dialogue. Let me just go back so you're not hearing that. It's based on a dialogue between the teaching artists and the participants. And again, the participants' needs and preferences are going to be different in every class, every day, in every community. So we're really going in with our ears open and making sure that the class is structured around participant needs and participant desires. So it really is their class. We're there to facilitate an expressive movement experience that is for them and about them.
So in a way, it sounds like it's been a co-created journey, but it's been a journey of a lot of fluidity, improvisation, dialogue with the dancers in the class.
Yes, and interesting you should mention co-creation and improvisation, because those are elements that at the beginning of teaching this class 20 years ago, we weren't sure that people would be comfortable with those elements. Because again, a lot of people coming into our class have never danced before. And sometimes for people who've never danced before, the idea of improvising or creating your own movement can be quite intimidating, particularly for people with a movement disorder who have been told, be careful, try not to move too much, try not to move too big. You can't do this, so there's a lot of negative talk that's coming at people coming in. And so until they get comfortable in the class, they really like to have a roadmap for movement. But what we discovered very quickly is that when given the right structure and framework, people are very confident and joyous improvisers. They are very happy to co-create with the teaching artist, to generate their own material, to generate their own movement stories. And so we now integrate a lot of co-creative opportunities within each class and over the course of a series of classes. That's a very important element. And what's great about that is it encourages people to problem solve, to be able to say, in my daily life, I often come up against movement challenges that I have to navigate around or through. And the co-creative opportunities in the dance class give me kind of an exploratory, experimental space where I can try things out, so that when those situations appear in real life, I'm not so intimidated by them. I have the skills to improvise my way through those blockades.
Well, thank you for those touching thoughts. I mean, this gives us the best inroads to my next question, is to get to the magic of the choreography. So in the New York classes, you offer classes that range from tap to contemporary to tango to some of the Mark Morris contemporary work. What's amazing to me, because I did have the privilege of taking a class, is that in its adaptations, I could only imagine the work that goes into it, no matter how you're engaging with the class, whether you're standing, seating, or partially seating and standing, the adaptations still capture the fullness of the form and the fullness of the dance and the spirit of the dance. So I would love to know how you accomplish that magic.
Reggie, it starts with the word respect, and it starts with the word dignity. Because going back to what I said earlier, the spirit of the class is that everybody in that class is a dancer. Everybody in that class is an artist. They are exploring their artistic potential to its fullest. And our role is to nurture that artistry throughout the experience. So when we are thinking about choreography to include in the class, whether that's Mark Morris repertory or whether that's a particular style of dance from around the world, we are thinking about what Liz Lerman would call the essence of that movement. What is the essence of that movement? What makes that movement magical or special? What is the DNA of that movement? What makes it tick? And the thing is that essence can be captured in so many ways. That go beyond the actual steps or the original sequence, but go actually deeper. So the first thing I do when I'm planning an activity is I think about, what is the essence of this choreography? What is the choreographer trying to say? Or what is this movement style about? And then that opens up many possibilities and many options through which a dancer can explore that style, that phrase, that choreography, without losing the essence of what it is like. My goal is that when somebody is moving through that choreography, they feel a deep connection to it. They feel that they are entitled to dance it. They are given permission to dance it. They are permitted to own it, even for that moment or a few minutes, that they can be fully inside of it. So that's why I'm not a fan of sort of going through the movement for the sake of movement. What I really want people to do is live inside that choreography. Even if they're doing one or two movements, they are doing that with the quality of that style, or the quality that choreographer was trying to achieve, or telling the story of that choreography in their own way. Even though the moves may come out a little bit differently than the original, I see it as part of a spectrum. You know, that original can be a starting point rather than an ending point. So a lot of times I think we mistakenly think that we're trying to get our dancers to get to the ending point of that original choreography. And for me, the original choreography is a starting point that allows us to take a new journey, not disrespecting that choreography, not forgetting it, but carrying the essence of that choreography into our own journeys. And that's the magic, I think.
It is. I mean, the word that we would use in expressive arts is that you offer an exquisite intermodal invitation, that there's no hierarchy of how someone could enter the space, that each person can enter this space in their way, whether it's through sound or imagery. And I think it was one class I took where it was a vaudevillian kind of dance form, and I was doing the seated version, and the only word I can say to describe it, it was transcendent. That it was just seamless between the teacher who was standing, the people who were sitting, the people who maybe had even less mobility than me, just the seamlessness that everyone was participating in one unifying line. So it seems like you go to great lengths of, it was what they would say is intermodally transferring the spirit and the fullness of that particular form into a variation that people can feel fully present.
Yes. And the other part of that, absolutely. The other part of that is that the people in our class have a richness of life experience, wisdom, and, you know, a world of, and a full life of many different kinds of experiences and perspectives. So in that way, they have the mindset of a very experienced, established artist. And we want to respect that. So when we're inviting them to participate in movement, they're coming in with all of that richness. And we don't want to lose that by watering down the concept of the movement. We do sometimes have to simplify the steps themselves or slow things down. But as I said, the quality and the context, the environment of that movement is still there. And there are multiple pathways for them to bring in their own life experience, which is in many cases much richer than mine because they've lived twice as long as I have. So, you know, it's allowing that experience to come in, and that gives their movements a wonderful, wonderful richness and depth that we want to celebrate.
That entry point doesn't equal end point, that people can enter a space in any way that's resonant, safe, and coherent for them.
Yeah. You know, what ties it all together, I think, in many ways is the music. And that's why I think this program was able to start and thrive at Mark Morris Dance Group, because Mark is such a musical choreographer, and music is the thread that is woven through every part of our organization, really. And so music is in many ways the most, the fullest, deepest, and some ways quickest qualitative prompt that we have. When we hear music, we generally don't need a lot of words to know how to move to that music. And that kind of envelopment that happens when we dance to music is something that we utilize as a kind of cohesive element in the class, and it's something that people pick up on right away, even if they've never experienced this particular choreography before. music has that power. Walter Pater, the art critic, said, all art aspires to the condition of music, in that you don't have to talk about it very much. We as humans recognize what that music is trying to say and how that music might manifest itself through movement.
In the expressive arts dance movement work, we use the word repatterning or restoring. That movement is metaphor, that it allows us to repattern and restory our inner experience. So you've talked about thinking like a dancer, using steps and sequence and creating a sentence. Can you talk a little bit about how that allows for restoring of the Parkinson's experience?
I think the idea of shifting one's identity away from living in a medicalized realm, which people with Parkinson's do, because Parkinson's is a chronic condition that you live with for the rest of your life. And I think there's a danger there in thinking of yourself then as a permanent patient. There's nothing we can do about curing Parkinson's right now, but we have a lot of power in shifting someone's identity away from being a patient into being all the other things that they are, right? Parents, professional, artist, right? All those things. And so I like to think that in class, in the dance for PD experience, that there is the opportunity to shift one's identity into creating meaning through art and being a dancer. And so when I ask people to think like a dancer, it's not just thinking about how we're strategizing movement or integrating elements of imagery and music. All of that is very important, but it's also thinking of oneself as a dancer in life, that when we approach life through a creative lens and through the lens of strategic problem solving, the way dancers do in all of their training and on stage and in their practice, we have a different attitude about how we're navigating the world. And that's really what thinking like a dancer is. And then I think that restores a sense of possibility and a sense of opportunity and a sense of sort of positive challenge for people, as opposed to, I just have to contend with this disease day in and day out. Mm-hmm. So that's for me, the restoration. And I guess I hearken back to someone like Arthur Frank, sociologist, who talked about, the challenge of living with chronic illness is, what is the narrative that you're telling yourself? Is it a restitution narrative where I have to try to get back to where I was pre-Parkinson's? Or is it more of a quest narrative where I am choosing to tell a different story about myself? I'm not telling a story of everything that I've lost. I'm telling a story of everything I can add back into my life. And dance, as my friend Dave Iverson says, dance is one of those things that has incredible additive properties. It adds in confidence. It adds in strategic problem solving. It adds in a sense of identity as a dancer or as an artist, as a creative person. It adds in the sense of belonging that we get in a dance class. So that's the shift in narrative that I hope is happening for individuals in the Dance for PD program, and that's the kind of restoration that I want to see.
In addition to that profound identity shift you're talking about, you've often said in your lectures, and I love this, it's about bringing a choreographic sensibility to each day. And that was very profound for me, because as someone also with a movement disorder, it's very easy to fall into a pattern of fear around falls and energy conservation and what you can do. And that's such a profound idea. It's to now, when you're hyper mindful of every moment, saying, am I doing this right? Am I safe? Am I losing my balance? But then to move into a different part of your brain, that dancer, that imagery, and to think, bringing that sensibility to each day as you go throughout the day. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I think about it as sort of, this is where dancers who dance for a living and dancers who are living with Parkinson's have a very similar challenge in that we have to understand and adapt to the choreography that is given to us. In the case of someone who's dancing for a living, that choreography is given to you by a choreographer, or maybe you're generating it yourself. For someone living with Parkinson's, you're contending with the choreography of life. But a lot of people don't think of it as choreography. They think of it as a struggle, as a challenge, as something that is an uphill battle. But when we reframe that as a choreographic challenge, how do I use the tools of my trade as a choreographer to change the parameters of time, space, and energy in a way that allows me to navigate through that challenge? Then I'm in a creative space of problem solving rather than the space of struggle and frustration. So an example that I often give is a friend who started dance for Parkinson's classes, taking dance for Parkinson's classes in California, in Oakland, California, and he found himself at a grocery store starting to experience freezing of gait. Freezing of gait in Parkinson's means you're losing the ability to initiate a forward step. So it's as if your feet are glued to the floor. And he realized that if he tapped into the choreographic ideas that he was working on in class and started thinking about his path to the cashier as a dance with a specified number of steps, with a specific rhythm, with a specific route and a specific quality, he was actually able to break out of that freeze more than he would if he started just thinking about, how am I going to walk? What if I don't walk? What is the person behind me thinking? So he put himself into the role of a choreographer and a dancer, and that freed up his ability to start to move forward again. And I love that example because that, to me, encapsulates what we can do when we think about the challenges of life as choreography, and think of ourselves as dancers moving through that choreography or creating that choreography to alleviate specific challenges that arise during the day.
Yeah, that inner artistry, that other sort of part of our brain, that visual system that we can access. This brings me to the next question is, as a mental health educator, when I learned about Dance for PD, dance, obviously from a mental health perspective, builds self-confidence, self-efficacy, activates the relaxation response, helps people to enter into therapeutic play. And obviously, from what I've learned, the Dance for PD does, would this be the correct word, soothe some of the Parkinson's symptoms? That's the medical part. And then the other is in terms of the mental health benefits or the self-cohesion, it's profound. But I'm just wondering, from my vantage point, what is one of the purpose of this series is to foster more integrative dialogues, particularly I think in the US, all of the disciplines are so siloed. And when you see the intersection of science and art and movement come together, it's a whole brain approach. Has it guided you to challenge to reconceptualize the way people, what the options are offered to people about well-being, resiliency, maintaining their symptoms over their lifespan?
Yes, I think what I've seen over the last 20 years is how much dance becomes a lifeline for people. You mentioned some of the sort of emotional health or mental health benefits, and we certainly see those not just in the published research, but in anecdotal evidence from our class. People talk about the anxiety that they experience every day, particularly the last 2 years, but even before then, the anxiety that they experience living with Parkinson's every day, that is a clinical manifestation in Parkinson's, is increased anxiety, but also just anxiety about what they're able to do, getting stuck, as Herb experienced in the grocery store, the sort of walls starting to close in a little bit and feeling that they're losing ability. The dance class counteracts that by sharing or exposing people to new skills and new possibilities as other possibilities might be closing off. So I think in that way, there's a sense of self-efficacy that happens in the class, the idea that I can do something. I can learn these dance movements. I can learn to improvise and actually make a statement with my body. In many ways, Parkinson's is an anti-theatrical condition. It takes away the expressive components that we need as expressive beings, whether that's big movements or facial expression or ability to project in our voice. Those elements are all affected in Parkinson's. And so, that idea that we can still do something, we can still express something, we still be part of something, provides a sense of self-efficacy that absolutely carries over into every other aspect of life. And I talk about the dance experience actually as a gateway to many other both creative and not so creative endeavors, whether that's joining a singing group or going to the gym more or being able to play with one's grandchildren. That gateway is so fundamentally important. And I would argue that a lot of that gateway is about the sense of confidence in addition to actual physical skill building and strength building that happens in sort of the athletic part of class. So it's the mental health perspective is an important one, because I think it gets at that idea of self-esteem and self-efficacy that carries over into other aspects, every other aspect of somebody's life. And particularly with Parkinson's, when you're talking about a condition that people live with for 10, 20, 30 years, the elements of confidence and self-esteem are incredibly important, because if those components of an individual identity are not being nurtured and not being recognized, then everything else becomes more difficult.
Yeah, it's mind, body, and spirit integration.
Yep.
But it also, when I watch the footage, I see it as a reclaiming of someone's neurology and their psychology. It's reclaiming both, reclaiming what they can engage with in terms of their mobility and their range, and re-engaging their spirit with what is possible now.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people talk about, they say, when I'm in class, I don't have Parkinson's. That's just it's not true medically. But what's important about that statement is they feel that they can move outside of their Parkinson's in class. They are in a completely different state, whether you want to call that a state of flow or a state of concentration or focus on something other than their symptoms. For that hour, they are transformed for themselves. From an outside perspective, does it look enormously different? Sometimes it does. But what's more important for me is that those individuals feel different. They are experiencing a non-Parkinson's state of awareness and state of being that reminds them that state still exists for them. And it's possible to achieve that within a few moments of focusing on the dance experience and being enveloped by the dance experience.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the quote from Reggie Butts where he said it liberated a part of him. It activated a sense of creativity. So to return to your life with that sense of inner freedom, I would imagine completely sort of reconfigures your experience of living with Parkinson's.
Absolutely. And what's important about that is that can happen whether someone is moving fully with their whole body or whether they're not moving at all, but simply in the class, looking around and enjoying the experience.
This brings me to the next question of all my music therapy comrades would love this, is about the music and the improvisation. We know that with current research that music is a whole brain activator. So I'm touched by the commitment of Mark Morris and Dance for PD, the commitment to live music in person in the class. When I think of Mark Morris, I think of him as a musician first and dancer second, and that for him, his movement is music in motion. So I have observed in Dance PD, it sounds like the movement vocabulary comes out of the musical story. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Music is a roadmap for everything we do in class. And as one of our participants said, it's a red carpet that rolls out in front and supports and amplifies movement in ways that are incredibly sustaining and supportive for our participants. There are so many elements of music that I think are important in this class. So I hesitate to break things down because, as we know, first and foremost, music plays the role of an integrator in our brain. When you see MRI scans of a brain listening to music, we see areas lighting up and working together that don't ordinarily cooperate, and bridges are formed in that way. So that's sort of on a holistic level. But for me, music operates on several levels for our participants. There's the rhythmic element that provides a structure for people who may be missing an internal sense of rhythm or an internal sense of rhythmic cueing. So things like an anacrusis, that moment before the downbeat. That is when a dancer will lift a foot in order to step on the downbeat. That anacrusis is something we might highlight in a musical phrase or in choreography that really connects how a dancer with Parkinson's is able to initiate movement when that might otherwise be difficult, sort of out on the sidewalk. People have trouble with that skill, but music, again, is that red carpet that provides a basis for that. The idea of a consistent, steady, unified rhythm throughout class is also something that people might be missing in their daily lives. But in class, you see people moving together. So music actually generates a sense of social empathy because we all get to move on the same beat. We all get to move together. And that creates this sense that we are all part of the same community. That there's some really good research on that from Denmark that looks at sort of a unified beat being a social glue, being a social convener.
A language.
Yeah, language, exactly.
Shared language.
So I could talk about the rhythmic elements a lot, but I also want to talk about sort of music as the structural elements of music. Music gives us a big map for what we're doing when. So we're going to be doing this phrase for part A, and then the music changes and we do something else, and then we come back to that. So there's structure and form that is incredibly reassuring for people living with Parkinson's who often may have executive function challenges and really like having a template for when we're doing what. And so the formal aspects of music are something that we listen for and highlight in our class. And again, it gives people a sense of confidence to know that they are on the road. It's very well signposted. They know when to do what, and that is something that they can then look for in other aspects of their life. I also think music, first and foremost, perhaps it has an emotional resonance for us, whether that is because we have a memory of hearing that music at a certain time in our lives, or whether there's just something about that music that evokes an emotional response. It is the musical elements provoke an expressive response for dancers in the class that is not just satisfying for them because they get to speak through their bodies, but in many ways it can increase amplitude. It can create a sense of a particular movement quality, which gives the dancers a sense of control over their bodies. When you have to evoke a certain image or tell a certain story for your body, through your body, you have to control that. You're given the tools to control that. And so music in some ways gives people ownership over their bodies again, which is an incredible thing to see.
So my next question is that in the arts, in expressive arts, we also talk about therapeutic play, the importance of therapeutic play. And in this class, I've seen people be able to live with paradoxes, vulnerability and freedom, or freedom in vulnerability. And, when I did take the class, I was often feeling at the edge of tears because just the expansiveness that you feel with the choreography, but knowing you're still living in this body with whatever constrictions there are. Can you talk about that? Because that's a beautiful thing to witness, just that pairing, that both things can exist, that you can feel vulnerable in some ways and feel free in this moment. And I think therapeutic play is a space that opens that.
Dance therapeutic space is a space where we invite people to be completely vulnerable, because they don't come in with a lot of knowledge of dance. And we're asking them to do something that might be very outside their normal realm of experience. We're also asking them to, Parkinson's is a condition that you wear on your body. It's not something that you hide or can hide. You can try to hide it. Some people try to hide it, but at a certain stage, it is there publicly for all to see, which I think is why many people with Parkinson's go out less and try to be less exposed to the public, and because they feel they always have to explain something about themselves. In this class, they don't have to explain anything at all. Everyone there has the same story in a way, than they're living with Parkinson's, although they have very different stories, individual stories. So this idea of not having to explain anything, but then also having to experience something that could be challenging, that could be sort of outside of one's comfort zone, is that paradox. And I think in that space, there's a lot of opportunity for people to try things out, to sit and not do anything and just absorb, to feel free to start and stop, to challenge what it means to participate. That's a big one for us. Participating is being there in the room. If you're in the room, you're already participating. That participation may sometimes include sitting still. It may sometimes include falling asleep. That's something that happens. People have a lot of fatigue with Parkinson's, and they come into the space. And when I started teaching, I noticed that occasionally people would drop off to sleep. And I had a long conversation about this. And I learned that, I learned to see that differently, because that person coming into the space finally felt calm and comfortable enough and safe enough to fall asleep. And that's a beautiful thing. Whereas coming from a teaching perspective, it's like, somebody fell asleep in your class. It must be you. You must be doing something wrong. You're boring them. And I mean, that may be true, but I think I started to see it in a completely different light. This is a space where people feel free to be and do whatever they want to do. And that in and of itself is incredibly therapeutic, because the rest of their experience is people telling them what they can and can't do, worrying about them in a non-productive way, and boxing them into this medicalized realm.
Yeah, and even if they are in class, they are present, and they are in the presence of music. They are in the presence of movement. So sometimes when I'm doing dance work, I'll say, you can even sit and close your eyes and imagine moving with us, or just take in the experience of being here right now. So it sounds like you really allow for that kind of latitude.
We do. We know it's supported by the research too, right? When we're watching movement, our brains are going through that movement, even if we ourselves are not moving. So there's a lot of play that happens, I think, just sort of through those visual prompts and visual stimulation. And then that's enhanced as people start to come into the space. So this idea of, intense vulnerability, but also intense possibility and celebration of self. All of those are bound up in the class experience. I think that's one of the reasons that people become so emotional in the class.
Yeah.
This happens quite frequently, where people will start crying in the middle of class.
It is.
And I think what they're experiencing, and what they've told me they're experiencing, is actually a joy at what they're what they're able to experience in their bodies,
Mhm.
a sadness perhaps in what they have lost,
Mhm.
and a gratitude
Mhm.
for being in a place where they can be completely open and vulnerable. And so those tears are representing all three of those things simultaneously. It
Mhm.
can be overwhelming.
Yeah, to re-experience that vulnerability with freedom, to re-experience that vulnerability with possibility. And it sounds like this space of therapeutic play and sound and movement allows for that opening.
There are very few places in our society
Mhm.
where there are no mistakes. There are no errors. There's no wrong. And I think we try to create that space in the class where there is no wrong. There's no error. There's nothing there's no good or bad.
Mhm.
It just is
Mhm.
in the moment.
Mhm.
And that invites a lot of hope, I think, and also a lot of freedom.
Mhm.
It was not just about Parkinson's, it's about our society,
Mhm.
right? Where there are constant, this is wrong, this is an error, this is not correct. You can't move like that. You shouldn't do this.
Mhm. Well, there's a
There's such
hierarchy.
a
Yeah.
negative vortex.
Mhm.
And this class is about try this, play with this, do what you want.
Mhm.
You don't
Mhm.
have to do anything.
Mhm. 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 And the safety of a non-judgmental open witness. And that's the key as well. And
Yeah.
not hierarchical, because many of the dance teachers are, professional dancers, so there's no hierarchy there. This brings me to my next question of accessibility. Dance for PD has made, it seems like one of the core values is the commitment to accessibility. You're accessible by having in-person, but also now a Zoom program online. You are accessible across cultures. It's been adapted in many different cultural contexts. You also have a phone program. So for people who don't have access to internet, they can engage with Dance for PD through phone by calling in and getting the audio recording of the choreography. But the one piece of the accessibility that means a lot to me is you're also accessible in language. So you're mindful of not saying, oh, you can just do this version or just this. And so you're just a model of accessibility, that even being mindful about inclusive language, there's no qualifier there. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, accessibility is the core pillar of what we do, because there's so much in the world that is inaccessible for people living with a disability and people living with Parkinson's. And so our goal from the beginning has been, how do we make this incredibly beautiful and life-affirming art form that we love so much accessible to everybody? And what does accessibility really mean? And alongside that is, who is not here in the room to experience this, and why not?
Mhm.
And what can we do to make sure that they are in the room and feel a sense of belonging in that room?
Mhm.
So I think where we started was a place of physical accessibility and making sure the movements were adaptable and translatable. I try really hard. You talked about language. I try not to use the word modify.
Mhm.
I try to use the word translate.
Mhm.
Translate is about equal.
Mhm.
Modify has a feeling of less than,
Mhm.
right? So how do we translate the essence of what we're doing for anyone in that room, whether they are dancing in a wheelchair, whether they're using a walker, whether they're standing, whether they're, uh, a care partner or someone with Parkinson's, whether they're living with another condition and have come into the Dance for PD class. So accessibility, physical first and foremost, but as we've gone along, we've realized that there's so many other issues related to access that are critically important,
Mhm.
right? Cultural access is important. Are our classes representing
Mhm.
the cultural backgrounds and preferences of the people in our community? And
Mhm.
if not, how do we get there?
Mhm.
Let's start with making sure that our teaching artist pool reflects the cultural variety
Mhm.
and diversity of our communities, right? Let's make sure our musical choices and musicians reflect the incredible tapestry in which we live culturally. So, and a big part of that is language.
Mhm.
We live blessedly in a city where there are more than 100 languages spoken. But we realize that even though people say dance is a universal language, we'll understand what you're doing, whether you're moving or not, whether you're speaking the same language or not. It's not actually true, because when you're learning something new in a language that is unfamiliar to you, there's a lot of anxiety and discomfort. And so we started actually during the pandemic to offer classes in Spanish and offer classes in Mandarin, because we realized when you are learning something, when you're experiencing something in a language that is your primary language, there's a sense of comfort and a sense of depth that you can really understand and incorporate what it is you're experiencing, that we really wanted to bring into the program. So I think that kind of accessibility is important too, and it's something that we're currently working to expand within New York, and of course within the global community as well. So,
Another important value that's a thread that we wanted to speak to in this series is the flawed social constructions we're all socialized into regarding the ability and disability spectrum. And Dancing for PD, Mark Morrison, is an intersectional space where those social constructions melt away, where dancers learn, fine art dancers learn from student dancers inform fine art dancers, that this is a truly intersectional space through this rare unifying activity that people of all levels of ability interact with one another. Can you say something about all of this whole social construction? Because when you witness a class, there's people of all experience levels, people who've performed on stage, people who are there for the first time, and they're all engaging in a unified way with the art of dance.
I think the core part of this goes back to the origins of the program,
Mhm.
which are about inviting people with Parkinson's into a dance space that's dedicated to dance, which is a non-medical space, a non-clinical space. And perhaps one of the only things that they do for their Parkinson's that's not in a clinical space. I think there's been so much, because Parkinson's has been framed as first and foremost a medical condition. It's seen through the lens of medical treatment and therapy. And when I talk to people with Parkinson's, they talk about Parkinson's as a quality of life condition, because it affects all aspects of their life. It's not just about the medical parts, it's everything. It's their social interaction, it's their expressive capacity, it's how their faces, or how they use their faces, it's how they can write, it's every aspect of somebody's life. So for us to host this kind of class in a dance center, surrounded by other dancers, reframes what they're going through as a part of their life that steps out of the medical framing and really invites them in to a non-medical space, which I think reconfigures Parkinson's as being on the spectrum, rather than, I'm a patient over here and everybody else is over here. It's like, I'm on the spectrum where there are some things that are more difficult for me, but there are lots of possibilities that are still available to me. And so we do not use the word Parkinson's in our class. We don't talk about symptoms. We don't talk about the research. We don't talk about the benefits. Not that we don't know those things, but when we use that language, it frames the experience as a clinical experience. You're doing this because it's good for your symptoms, or you're doing this because the research says that it will help you.
Mhm.
We can have that in the back of our minds, and so can the participants. But in that space, we are not boxing people into thinking about things medically. There are many other opportunities for them to do that outside of the studio. In the studio, we are only talking about ways that they can be dancers and
Mhm.
ways that they can think creatively and artistically
Mhm.
about themselves.
So, David, Dance for PD is one of those rare spaces in the world where art and science intersect. It's a beautiful example of art's contribution to science. And I know that I speak for many people to say that for 20 years, you have nurtured a space of wonder. So I just want to thank you
Thank you.
from the bottom of my heart. And what is the legacy of Dance for PD?
We hope that this program serves as a model for all artists and all individuals who are living with challenges, which is all of us, to leverage the arts in the service of sustaining quality of life, sustaining well-being, sustaining mental health, and sustaining physical possibilities. I would like Dance for PD to be a program that people use as a template for a few things. One, the way that arts organizations can engage communities in a conversation that enhances that community's well-being. Number two, I hope it serves as a template for how medical professionals can think about the arts as a partner, as a collaborator, as a parallel path that can help people living with conditions that are treated in the medical realm live longer, live better, live more fulfilling lives, and to not only be perceived through the medical lens. And we're seeing that more and more in our program, that physicians are reaching out and saying, how do we start a program at our medical center? And of course, I always say, very happy that you're interested. Is there a dance center in town where you could partner with an arts organization to offer this class? So again, we're trying to take it out of the clinical space. Obviously, there are classes that happen at hospitals, and we're very glad they're happening, but how do we reframe that conversation? And number three, I would love for the class to be, or the program to be, a template for policymakers who are looking at ways that arts can help us navigate a very challenging healthcare environment where we have tightening budgets, a growing aging population that really requires a broad spectrum approach to well-being, not just a medical approach, but how do we enhance and sustain people's quality of life through the lifespan as people are living longer, as we have a huge population of people over 65. And so I'm hoping that policymakers can really use the legacy of Dance for PD as an example for building partnerships that bring together artists, scientists, medical professionals, and community leaders to build healthier communities throughout our world.
Well, David, thank you for that comprehensive answer, because you just articulated the hope of this Arts and Recovery Reporter's Notebook. This is exactly the kind of narrative that we want to curate by inviting innovative, expressive arts advocates such as you. So for our final question, the end note to each interview is, can you share with the audience, what is your own personal arts practice? What are the arts practices you go to self-soothe, ground, and regulate your own mind, body, and spirit?
Now, although I'm not taking a daily dance class anymore, I'm dancing all the time. So for me, as a teacher, I love the creative challenges of planning my classes and dancing through those classes and bringing in new influences, new styles, new perspectives. So quite honestly, the planning process for me is a choreographic process. It is a deeply felt process that I enjoy very much. Stepping out of work, though, for me, music is the art form that I turn to for relaxation, for stimulation, for creative daydreaming, for reassurance, for stress reduction. And so that is, music is such a big part of my life. And sometimes that's music that's shared with family and enjoying it together and dancing together. Sometimes music is a very personal and private enjoyment. And I like it in both aspects. So, and of course, going to hear music as well. There's nothing quite like hearing a live concert, to really feel, not just to hear the music, but to actually feel it, to feel it through the floor, to feel the energy vibrating through the air. So as much as I can, it's hard right now, but certainly that's a big part of what I do. I actually will secretly admit that I would, given a choice between a music concert and a dance performance, I tend to go with a music concert, because that for me is a truly an internal meditative experience, a rejuvenating experience. The dance concert, I think I'm coming at it with so much of a sort of professional mindset. I'm in a space of, critiquing, judging, all that. Whereas music, I can be completely free from all of that. So that's, and I also, I'm a very amateur pianist. So playing music and sort of generating music that way is very satisfying for me. And I'm very happy that no one else has to hear that.
Well, David, I want to thank you for being the first guest in this important series to our disaster shock community. What you said about the legacy of Dance for PD is what we hope comes out of this initiative, that these interviews with experts offer a guide, offer a template of people feeling like these could be references to be able to build on. So I thank you for all the work that you've done for Dancing for PD. And we will be adding a slide to the end of this video. So for our audience to learn more about Dance for PD, they can go straight to the website, and there's many ways to engage with your community, if that's correct.
There are many ways to engage, absolutely, especially right now. So we have, in-person classes, online classes, at-home videos, dance by phone. And for those of you out there who are interested in learning about what we do from a teacher's perspective, we offer comprehensive teacher training. And that's been a big part of what we do in terms of building that legacy and sharing the work with as many teaching artists and expressive artists that we